At 32, Lyly thought she had finally found peace. After years of struggle, she had built a quiet, content life on the edge of town, working in a local library, surrounded by stories that reminded her of everything she'd overcome. But that illusion shattered the moment her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, "Left this morning for Hawaii. The kids are all set, just follow the schedule. Love you." Her heart dropped. A second message followed almost instantly. "Don't bother calling, we'll be off grid. You're the responsible one." After all, that was when it hit her. They had actually done it. Her parents had boarded a plane to paradise, leaving behind 3 young children, her sister's kids, on Christmas morning. Without so much as asking her. Not even a conversation, just a decision made for her. Dumped on her doorstep like she was a hired nanny. But Lyly wasn't a doormat anymore. They had used her kindness too many times, always cloaking their demands in sweet words like, "Just this once," or, "You're so good with them." This time, they had crossed a line. As the kids ran to hug her, full of joy and clueless about the betrayal they'd just experienced, Lyly smiled for them, but behind that smile was a storm. They didn't deserve this. None of them did. So while her parents were sipping cocktails on a beach, Lyly started taking pictures of the note, the schedule, the empty house. She called the lawyer she had quietly consulted months ago, already suspecting this day might come. Then she called Child Protective Services. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it because someone had to protect the children and herself. Her entire life, she had been told family comes first. But what nobody told her was that real family doesn't abandon you. Real family doesn't manipulate or guilt you into sacrificing your well-being. So when her mother called, frantic and furious, Lyly didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You have 1 hour to fix this, or I let the authorities handle it." And for the first time, her mother was the one who panicked. Lyly stood firm, because love without respect isn't love at all. And being the responsible one didn't mean being everyone's backup plan. It meant having the strength to say, enough. That Christmas, Lyly gave those kids something they had never truly known: safety, honesty, and someone who chose them without being forced to. And in doing so, she gave herself the greatest gift of all: freedom. At 34, Lyly had finally found a rhythm in life, her modest home, her job as a landscape designer, and the quiet joy of her weekends spent tending her garden. But all of that peace unraveled the day she discovered the truth. It started with a letter in the mail, a notice from the city about a lien placed on her property for unpaid taxes. Confused, she called the office only to be told that her name had been added to her mother's home and financial dealings years ago, without her knowledge. That night, she confronted her parents. Her mother feigned confusion. Her father shrugged like it was no big deal. "It's just paperwork, Lyly," her mother said sweetly. "We needed your name on a few things. You weren't using your credit anyway." That's when the memories came rushing back, the times they borrowed money and never returned it. The times they dismissed her concerns with gaslighting smiles. The years of subtle control disguised as family love. Lyly realized she hadn't just been used, she had been trapped. Not just emotionally, but legally, financially. Her own life had been hijacked under the guise of helping those she loved. She stayed quiet at first, like she always did, but inside, she was unraveling the tangled web they had spun around her. For months, she researched, she dug into old records, consulted a financial advisor and eventually a lawyer. What she found was worse than she imagined. Credit cards opened in her name, loans she never applied for. Her parents had built a house of debt on the foundation of her identity, and she was the one who'd be buried under it if she didn't act. So she did, quietly, calmly, and with the precision of someone who had spent years being underestimated. She froze the accounts, filed fraud reports, transferred assets. She even found a buyer for her parents' house, one they didn't know she legally owned half of. Then, on the morning they planned a lavish family brunch, Lyly showed up early with her attorney and a stack of documents. Her parents were still in their robes when they were handed the notice of sale. Her mother sputtered, "You can't do this to us." And Lyly, steady and unflinching, replied, "No, you did this to yourselves." For the first time in her life, she watched the panic shift from her shoulders to theirs. That brunch never happened. That house was sold within the month. And Lyly? She moved into a quiet condo by the lake, where no one had access to her accounts, her time, or her peace. They thought they had her, soft, loyal, obedient Lyly, but they forgot that even the quietest daughters eventually learn to roar. At 35, Lyly had mastered the art of enduring insults with a polite smile. For years, she stood quietly at family events, enduring the whispers, the condescending smirks, the backhanded compliments that came from her husband's wealthy family, particularly from her sister-in-law, Vanessa, and her mother-in-law, Carol. They never saw her as an equal. She was just a nurse from a modest background, never good enough for Robert, their prized golden boy, but nothing compared to the humiliation they staged at Vanessa's wedding. When Lyly arrived, dressed simply but elegantly, she was handed a name tag. It didn't say Mrs. Lyly Wilson. It said housekeeper. Laughter bubbled through the ballroom as Vanessa tapped the tag and quipped, "Come on, Lyly, you've always been more help than family." Even Carol sipped her wine smugly, clearly in on the joke. Her table had no place setting, no seat of honor, no acknowledgement that she was Robert's wife. It was the final blow in a long line of small cruelties. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lyly had been preparing for this moment for months. She smiled as she pinned the name tag to her dress, a gesture so calm it made Vanessa blink. For 6 months, Lyly had been documenting every questionable financial move Carol made through Robert's accounts. She had hired a private investigator to track Vanessa's secret affair, something Vanessa foolishly believed she had hidden. And a week before the wedding, Lyly had quietly met with Michael's mother, Eleanor, and handed her a neatly organized folder, one that detailed Carol's misuse of funds and Vanessa's betrayal. Eleanor was furious but composed, exactly the type of woman who would make sure everything came to light at just the right moment. As the wedding unfolded around her, Lyly played the role of the passive outsider, knowing full well that her carefully laid plan would detonate before the champagne flutes were emptied. And when it did, when Michael received the envelope at his suite, when Eleanor stood in the middle of the ballroom and announced Vanessa's lies, when Carol's financial fraud was exposed and their family name was dragged into scandal, Lyly didn't flinch. She sipped her drink and smiled softly, not out of spite, but out of liberation, because she was done begging to belong. She didn't need their approval. She needed her freedom, and she took it, beautifully, devastatingly, and without raising her voice. That night, she walked away from the wreckage of the Wilsons' reputation, her head high and her spirit light. For the first time, she didn't feel small, she felt powerful, because when you're underestimated for too long, revenge isn't loud, it's graceful, it's silent, it's complete. At 33, Lyly had grown used to being overlooked, by neighbors, by the wallboard, even by the woman who lived next door, Karen Whitmore. Karen was the self-appointed queen of Crestwood Estates, a gated community where Lyly had moved for peace and a bit of land to call her own. She bought a modest property just outside the official WA jurisdiction, a charming 2-acre plot where she kept chickens, a small garden, and a rescue goat named Daisy. But Karen didn't care about property lines. To her, Lyly's lifestyle was unsightly and lowering neighborhood value. The first complaint was about the chickens, then the color of Lyly's mailbox, then the way she parked her car. Each time, Lyly responded politely, providing documents proving she was not under WA control. Each time, Karen grew more aggressive. One afternoon, Lyly returned home to find an official-looking notice taped to her door, "Final warning, non-compliance." It wasn't from the city. It was from Karen. Along with it, a list of arbitrary violations and a $500 fine. That's when Lyly knew Karen wasn't going to stop. But instead of confronting her in anger, she quietly began gathering evidence. She installed cameras around her property. She documented every encounter, every notice, and every time Karen trespassed to take pictures of her land. The final straw came when Lyly caught Karen, on camera, unhooking the goat's fence and attempting to lead Daisy away. That footage, paired with months of harassment and forged notices, gave Lyly everything she needed. She contacted a lawyer, then the city, then the local news, which jumped at the chance to cover the "Wa tyrant versus the peaceful neighbor" story. Karen had no idea what was coming. At the next community meeting, Lyly arrived with folders for each board member, a flash drive of the footage, and a calm, steady voice. She laid out Karen's fake authority, her boundary violations, and her targeted harassment. The room fell silent. When the story aired 2 nights later, Karen's face was plastered on every TV in the county, labeled the "Wa bully who went too far." The fallout was swift. Karen was stripped of her position. The Wa faced legal pressure to clarify its jurisdiction. And Lyly? She gained a reputation, not as the quiet woman with a goat, but as the neighbor who stood her ground with grace and evidence. The community rallied around her, bringing eggshell blue paint for her mailbox and offering to help fix her garden gate. Lyly didn't want revenge, she wanted peace. And now, with Karen gone and Daisy happily munching weeds in the sun, she finally had it. Because some battles aren't won with shouting, but with patience, planning, and the truth. At 35, Lyly had learned to trust her instincts, especially when it came to people who smiled too sweetly. Her neighbor Karen Whitmore was exactly that kind of person, all sugary greetings and fake concern. The kind that always felt like a trap. Lyly had lived peacefully in her modest home on the edge of Crestwood Estates, growing her own vegetables and minding her business. But Karen, head of the Wa, decided that Lyly's tomatoes, yes, her tomatoes, were a problem. First, it was subtle, a few missing fruits here and there. Then whole bunches vanished, and Lyly started noticing footprints near the garden bed early in the morning. It didn't take long before she realized someone was stealing her harvest. And deep down, she knew exactly who it was. Karen never asked, never apologized. In fact, she paraded around the neighborhood with baskets of fresh tomatoes, acting like they came from her own backyard. Lyly didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, she installed a small camera tucked behind the marigolds and waited. Days later, there it was. Karen, in her floral robe, tiptoeing into Lyly's garden at dawn, snatching tomatoes like they were hers. But Lyly wasn't going to call her out the usual way. She had something better in mind. The next planting cycle, Lyly got creative. She replaced a few of her tomato plants with Carolina Reapers, one of the hottest peppers on earth, and grafted them to look like sweet heirlooms. When harvest time came, she knew Karen wouldn't be able to resist. Sure enough, one morning Lyly checked the camera and caught Karen doing her usual sneaky rounds, plucking the new tomatoes and tucking them into her basket. Later that afternoon, Lyly heard the yelling 2 houses down. Karen had eaten one of the tomatoes and was screaming bloody murder. Face red, running around the yard like she'd been set on fire. It was poetic, but it didn't end there. Karen filed a formal complaint with the Wa, claiming Lyly had poisoned her. At the emergency meeting, Lyly arrived prepared. She played the footage for the entire board, complete with timestamps, showing Karen trespassing and stealing produce from private property. The room fell silent. One board member cleared his throat and asked, "So, you're admitting you stole from her?" Karen turned purple. The vote to remove her from her position was unanimous. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. And Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the Wa, became a cautionary tale instead. Lyly didn't celebrate loudly. She went home, picked a few peppers, and smiled to herself. Justice didn't always come with drama, sometimes it came with patience, planning, and a very spicy surprise. At 32, Lyly cherished 2 things more than anything: her vintage Chevy Chevelle and her hard-earned peace. After a decade of working double shifts and saving every dime, she finally bought the classic car of her dreams and moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, hoping to settle into a life of calm. But peace wasn't something Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the local Wa, respected. From the day Lyly parked her Chevelle in her own driveway, Karen had a problem. That rust bucket is lowering property values. She sneered one morning, arms crossed and tone laced with contempt. Lyly simply raised an eyebrow and went back to polishing the hood. But the snide remarks didn't stop. Karen left bogus violation notices, threatened to tow the car, and even snapped photos like some sort of self-appointed inspector. Lyly knew something had to be done when she found a scratch on the passenger side and a faint smell of gasoline one evening. That's when she installed security cameras around her property, every angle covered. She wasn't going to be intimidated. Not by Karen or the fake power she clung to. 2 weeks later, the cameras paid off. Lyly was awakened at 2 a.m. by an alert on her phone. She watched, horrified and furious, as Karen and an unknown accomplice tried to siphon gas from her Chevelle. But it got worse. Karen pulled out a lighter, waving it in the air as if testing how far she could go. That was it. Lyly called the police immediately, sending them live video footage as they sped toward her property. The arrests were swift. Karen screamed about injustice and neighborhood rights. But the evidence was undeniable. The lighter, the siphon, the vandalism, caught in crystal clear HD. Lyly pressed charges. The community, long tired of Karen's reign of terror, rallied behind her. At the trial, the judge called Karen's actions reckless and malicious, sentencing her to 5 years in prison. In the aftermath, Lyly was awarded damages for property destruction and emotional distress. The WA faced pressure to disband and restructure. Karen's name, once associated with authority, was now a byword for neighborhood disgrace. Lyly didn't brag. She simply restored her Chevelle, parked it proudly in the same spot, and sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea. The hum of justice finally louder than Karen's hate. Peace, at last. And this time, it was hers to keep. At 35, Lyly had learned that appearances could be deceptive, and no one taught her that lesson better than Charles, her charming, manipulative brother-in-law. For years, she had watched him snake his way through family gatherings, spinning stories about his business ventures and luxurious lifestyle. He flaunted success he hadn't earned, mocked those who questioned him, and wore a smug smile that made Lyly's skin crawl. Everyone saw him as a golden boy. Lyly saw the cracks, especially when she caught him subtly belittling others to elevate himself. But she said nothing, until the wedding. It was her cousin's big day, and Lyly had been asked to help with the event planning. As she moved through the venue, double-checking details, she overheard Charles whispering to a guest, "Lyly? Oh, she's just here to clean up after the messes. Always has been." The words stung, but not with surprise, just confirmation. That night, as champagne flowed and laughter filled the ballroom, Charles continued his smug charade. He didn't know Lyly had been quietly gathering receipts for months. Years of passive-aggressive digs, financial lies buried in family trusts, and secret recordings from whispered conversations were all organized neatly in her encrypted folder. The final straw? Charles had forged signatures on documents meant to transfer ownership of their late grandfather's estate, stripping Lyly and 2 other family members of their rightful inheritance. Lyly didn't confront him that night. Instead, she waited until the will reading the following week. With the entire family seated, expecting business as usual, she stood up calmly and handed a file to the lawyer. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice firm but steady, "I believe this will change the distribution." Gasps filled the room as proof of Charles's betrayal unfolded before them. Emails, altered documents, bank transfers. Charles turned pale. "This is a mistake," he sputtered, but Lyly met his eyes. "No, Charles. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't notice." By the end of the week, Charles was facing criminal charges. The estate was rightfully redistributed, and Lyly, once dismissed as just the quiet one, became the family's unexpected force of justice. She didn't gloat. She simply walked away from the courthouse with her head high, her peace intact, and the truth finally vindicated. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's calculated, quiet, and undeniable. One of the most powerful lessons drawn from this story is the importance of boundaries, self-worth, and reclaiming one's voice after years of silent endurance. Life often conditions us, especially those who are naturally empathetic or dutiful, to put others first, to keep the peace, and to tolerate manipulation under the guise of love or obligation. But there comes a moment when silence becomes complicity, and choosing yourself becomes the only path to healing. For older adults who may have spent years sacrificing for family, friends, or societal expectations, this narrative serves as a reminder: it's never too late to draw the line. Strength doesn't always roar, it can be the quiet firmness of saying, enough. Justice isn't always delivered by the loudest voice, but by the most prepared mind. Love without respect is control. And family without accountability is a burden, not a blessing. True liberation often comes not from vengeance, but from the clarity and courage to walk away. This story teaches us that wisdom lies in knowing when to stop giving to those who only take, and that there's immense dignity in choosing peace over approval.